Voters of Wisconsin, ASCE Wisconsin section, invest in Wisconsin's infrastructure program on stormwater and dams, the 5th of 7 category meetings on ASCE's 2020 infrastructure report card. We will hear from 2 ASCE professional engineers about Wisconsin's stormwater and dams infrastructure categories, and we will get 5 different perspectives on stormwater and dams categories from a member of the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, a UW-Milwaukee Civil and Environmental Engineering Research Professor, a Wisconsin DNR Dam Safety Engineer, a Wisconsin DNR Water Resources Engineer, and Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District Manager of Engineering Planning. After the presentations, we welcome our audience to participate in a Q&A with authors and panelists. As Laura mentioned, this program is being recorded and will be available on the League of Women Voters Wisconsin YouTube channel for those particularly elected officials unable to attend. I am Anne Chartier, and I am a retired Spanish teacher, and I taught in 2 Wisconsin schools for 26 years and have been a member of the League of Women Voters for 2 decades. It is my honor to be your moderator today and serve both on the local board and the state board. As a resident of Ashland, where we've had stormwater overflows into Lake Superior's Chequamegon Bay, I am well aware of the havoc aging pipes and excessive rain can wreak on a community due to lack of funds for infrastructure maintenance or upgrades and worsening weather caused by climate change. Our local Natural Resources Committee has collaborated with concerned parties in organizing forums to inform the public about the causes of stormwater overflows, what residents can do to help, and the improvements our Public Works Department has been able to make. I have encountered Wisconsin dams while paddling its waters and driving or cycling along its roads. This infrastructure series is a fantastic opportunity to learn. I encourage you to sit back and take in the valuable presentations you are about to hear. Please put your questions in the chat. They will be posed to the presenters at the end. Next slide, please. As you can see, this is an overview of this afternoon's program. We'll look at why the League is working with the American Society of Civil Engineers Wisconsin section. You'll have information about both organizations. We'll get presentations from lead authors of both the stormwater and dams chapters of the report card. There will be 5 panelists who will be giving brief comments. We'll have Q&A with authors and panelists. We will thank everybody involved. You'll hear information about the upcoming 2 programs, and there will be a call to action. Next slide, please. Why is the League working with ASCE Wisconsin? In September 2020, ASCE Wisconsin published the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card. They then invited the League to join them in educating the public about the report card. After reading the report card and noting the poor grades, the League voted to accept ASCE's invitation. The report card evaluates 13 categories of infrastructure: aviation, bridges, dams, drinking water, energy, hazardous waste, inland waterways, ports, roads, solid waste, stormwater, transit, and wastewater. Infrastructure all of us rely on every day. Energy received a grade of B, which is adequate for now. The rest of the categories received C's, which is mediocre and requiring attention, or D's, poor and at risk. The report card is a heads up that we can't take these systems for granted. They are aging. Infrastructure crosses local and state jurisdictions and requires public financing to design, build, operate, and maintain. These systems are designed to serve the public and protect the public and the environment. Because we, the people, ultimately pay for Wisconsin's infrastructure, we will be asked to pay to fix and address issues such as COVID, pandemic, and climate change as well. Thus, it is our civic responsibility to become better informed and our civic duty to contact our elected officials with informed input. The League of Women Voters of Wisconsin supports increased investment in infrastructure. We need to fund ongoing operations and maintenance, improvements, and innovation. As we learned during 4 overview meetings, we can raise infrastructure grades and also pass valuable assets onto everyone's children and grandchildren. Next slide, please. I will now introduce Carl Sutter, Director of ASCE-WI Wisconsin and Senior Vice President of the Environment and Infrastructure Division of McMahon Associates in Neenah, Wisconsin. He is a professional engineer and certified construction specifier with a BS degree in civil and environmental engineering from UW-Madison. He has over 40 years of experience in engineering, most of it in the public realm of environmental and infrastructure engineering. Now, Carl will give us a brief description of ASCE.
Okay, thank you very much, Ann. The American Society of Civil Engineers is the oldest professional engineering organization in the United States. It is a not-for-profit society and was founded in 1852 in New York City. It is worldwide with over 150,000 members in 177 countries. It also consists of 9 institutes which specialize in specific areas of civil engineering. These institutes are architectural engineering, coasts, oceans, ports, and rivers, construction, engineering mechanics, environmental and water resources, geotechnical, structural, transportation and development, and utility engineering and surveying. The Wisconsin section of ASCE was established in 1923. It comprises most of the state with the exception of the area near Superior and consists of 4 branches and 1,886 members. ASCE works to raise awareness of the need to maintain and modernize the nation's infrastructure using sustainable and resilient practices, advocates for increasing and optimizing investment in infrastructure, and improve engineering knowledge and competency. Civil engineers are global leaders building a better quality of life. Our society mission is to provide essential value to our members and partners, advance civil engineering, and serve the public good. Our code of ethics lists that engineers, first and foremost, protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. This presentation is part of our advocacy and education effort. At this time, I'd like to introduce Louise Pedring, immediate past president of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, who will give us a brief introduction to the League.
Thank you very much, Carl. With 2,800 members in local leagues shown on this map, the League's work is also recognized by partners and donors. Over 5,000 members and supporters across Wisconsin contribute to our mission to empower voters through education and advocacy and to defend democracy. While we are a political organization, we are nonpartisan, and we neither support nor oppose political parties or candidates. Our political action is based on our issue positions, established after members' study of diverse sources of information, discussion, and consensus among the members. As an organization of 101 years, it is our long-held and more recent positions that root our advocacy. Advocacy all done in the interest of good government of, by, and for the people, all people. League members have a natural interest in investing in infrastructure because how we build and manage our infrastructure determines the health of people and communities, the health of our environment, and the health of our economy. Membership in the League is open to all. Back to you, Ann. Next slide.
I think we need to move forward one next slide. Thank you very much, Louise. We will now move to the chapter presentations. A reminder that while you are listening to the stormwater and dams presentations and subsequent talks by members of the panel, please enter your question in the chat and let us know whom to direct it to. Laura will be monitoring the chat and we will address your questions after we finish hearing from the panelists. Next slide, please. Jacob Brunoehler is a graduate with the BS degree in civil engineering from Valparaiso University and is a registered professional engineer in Wisconsin. He has previously worked as project engineer for Patrick Engineering, an engineering technician for Soil and Materials Engineers, Inc. in Michigan, and a project manager for the Norfolk Southern Railway Corporation. Currently, Jake is the regional engineer for ADS, supporting the Wisconsin and Upper Michigan sales teams as the technical specialist in stormwater modeling, manufacturing, specifications, structural design, best construction and inspection practices, and more. Currently, Jake is the president-elect for the Southeastern branch of ASCE-WI. He previously served the branch as director at large, overseeing membership and conference and event coordination. At the section level, Jake was also involved in the drafting and publication of the 2020 ASCE Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card. In his spare time, he enjoys home brewing, woodworking, and travels with his wife as members of a traditional Irish band. Jacob Brunoehler will now give the stormwater presentation. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Ann. Good afternoon. As she said, my name is Jake Brunoehler, and I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you all. I will say briefly about stormwater and our Wisconsin infrastructure that is tasked with managing. So go ahead and move on to the next slide. Just in case this is the first of these sessions that you've had a chance to attend, I will give a very brief overview of the report card. The infrastructure report card is a tool created by ASCE at a national level and its membership to aid our membership and aid residents, businesses, and policymakers to better understand the state of infrastructure, and for our Wisconsin infrastructure report card specific to Wisconsin infrastructure. This vital information helps, it just starts relatable key conversations about how to improve the future of that infrastructure. So it uses a simple A to F school report card format, and the 2020 report card provides that comprehensive but yet approachable assessment of current infrastructure conditions and needs for the future. Go ahead, next slide. Access to reliable and safe infrastructure improves the quality of life and sets the table for sustainable economic growth. Positive economic growth hinges on the availability and capacity of the underlying systems that must support it, namely our infrastructure. And go ahead, next slide. So naturally, the quality of our infrastructure is an issue that affects everyone in Wisconsin. Clean water is essential to public health and our quality of life. For those who may not have skimmed the report card yet, Wisconsin brought home a C grade in stormwater infrastructure, which does require attention. Go ahead, next slide. Before I get too deep into the seaweeds on how that grade was assessed and ways to raise it, I always like to start with the why. Why is our grade this the way it is? Why is it important? Why do we do what we do? And Wisconsin is home to 15,000 inland lakes. The land of 10,000 lakes has got nothing on us. So as well as 53,000 streams, 200 miles of boundaries on the Mississippi River, nearly 2,700 miles of trout streams, and more than 1,000 miles of Great Lakes coastline. That includes 192 coastal beach miles. Next slide. You may not fish, but for both commercial fishing operations, drinking water quality, outdoor recreation, public health, and tourism makes strong health of our local water bodies absolutely essential. The quality in these natural resources depends in very large part on the health and condition of our state's stormwater infrastructure. Go ahead, next slide. Not only that, but when you think more realistically and holistically about infrastructure, it's absolutely undeniable how interrelated stormwater is and can be woven into absolutely every other sector. So back when I first, we'll say, we'll say a few years ago, when I first declared my major at Valpo to be civil engineering, I actually sat down with a family member of mine, my uncle, who's had a 30+ year career with the Indiana Department of Transportation. He gave me a quick anecdotal idea that has really stuck with me about the civil engineering profession, and he said, Jake, 90% of what civil engineers do is figure out where the water goes and how it gets there, and then what happens once it gets there. So some of you may recall the photo on the screen from the bottom of a sinkhole at I believe the corner at North Avenue and Oakland Avenues in Milwaukee. This is a photo back from 2010 after heavy rains caused the pavement to give way. The heavy rains found enough of a washout on aging infrastructure underneath that the combined sewer pipe emptied the entire roadbed out from underneath itself. So there was enough of a hole that was created underneath the pavement structure that it washed the entire road base out. The road washed out enough that there was nothing holding up the road above it. And so all of a sudden it just collapsed and swallowed that. I was to say, as you can see, there's an entire Cadillac Escalade on the screen there. This is certainly an extreme example, but it illustrates the idea that as our systems underneath the ground, our stormwater conveyance systems, as those continue to deteriorate and degrade, the destruction and deterioration of our surface level infrastructure and interrelated systems is inevitable, all because the water below the surface is getting to places that it was never really intended to be, and supposed to be going due to the failed infrastructure. Go to the next slide. So ASCE does assist with setting criteria for the assessment and grading scale metrics. As those are somewhat proprietary, I can't share the exact methodology and criteria, but I will give you some quick facts that certainly contributed to how Wisconsin earned that grade. Earned it, both for the good and maybe not so. Wisconsin is one of the many states that is leading the charge in innovation towards a more sustainable and resilient stormwater infrastructure. There are many research initiatives. I think even with some of our guests here on this presentation, many research initiatives happening in place at local colleges and universities, seeking to find solutions to some of the state's most challenging stormwater issues. University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee is exploring the potential uses and implications of real-time controls to increase systems capacities. Several municipalities are engaging with the public with urban and suburban leaf management programs to mitigate phosphorus loading that causes algae blooms and other waterway impairments. In like manner, public engagement is absolutely critical regarding mitigation of chlorides loading through improper application of road de-icing agents. Some would tell you that there's no greater pollutant challenge than our salt usage. That from an application rate to the challenges of removing salt from the runoff that is getting to places it's not supposed to be, that there is no greater challenge from a pollutant removal perspective than our salt usage as humans. The Wisconsin Saltwise organization, in conjunction with the street and highway departments, are utilizing brines and pre-wetting and updating tools and equipment to apply no more de-icing agents than absolutely necessary to ensure safe travel conditions. Wisconsin has even given rise to several stormwater consortiums and think tanks and groups bringing together champions motivated to find and share and implement innovative and effective stormwater infrastructure. Next slide. As part of our state's environmental stewardship that has been tasked to the Wisconsin DNR through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Water Act, our state's waterways are assessed for their level of contamination and impairment based on certain health and utility parameters set by the EPA. So many of these, actually more than you'd think, surprisingly, many of these bodies of water continue to drop off the impaired list, that we are making headway on some of these impaired water bodies lists through both point and non-point pollution mitigation efforts by all levels of stakeholders, both public and private. Many of these water bodies are delisted every year. Next slide. So the big question, how to go about raising the grade. We'll start with the top of that list, doubling down on public engagement with Wisconsinites through multiple different avenues. You can do that through digital media platforms to raise awareness, really trying to engage with the public to raise awareness of our impact as public citizens on stormwater, through de-icing and through your home downspout disconnections, especially in urban settings, and other avenues to improve water quality and the quantity of that stormwater run. Really chasing that ounce of prevention versus the pound of cure that can be set to our public agencies and our sewerage districts and our regional planning commissions. That what we do in our day-to-day life as public citizens, it matters. How we treat our leaves, what happens to our trash, our pet waste, how we all wash our cars and manage the water that we use to wash our cars, pesticides and lawn fertilizer applications, and the list goes on. These are not inconsequential activities that we do as public citizens. And the more that we can learn about that, the more that we can engage with the public to get word out on those sorts of things, the better off we all are. Second on the list, since a lot of that engagement and just general stewardship in general is not free, this stuff just doesn't happen, bolster the funding levels of municipal stormwater utilities, to allow for more sustainable stormwater management of our regional BMPs, small scale BMPs across all of Wisconsin. There's nothing in this world where you do not get what you pay for. And our infrastructure is no exception to that. I did find out through drafting the stormwater chapter of the report card, I did actually find out that Wisconsin has been a leader in the implementation, deactivation, and management through stormwater utilities. Not every state has the ability and backbone infrastructure to be able to implement those stormwater utilities at a local level. If you ever look at your utility bill closely, you will see in many municipalities across the state of Wisconsin, there's our stormwater utilities range from a few dollars a year, and I actually just updated some of the data on that, up to almost $250 a year, depending on where you live and the amount of stormwater infrastructure that's under that jurisdiction. And when you think about it, those, as much as those, those are real dollars, compared to the cost of aging infrastructure and our quality of life, it's a small price to pay for the quality of life that we get from our stormwater infrastructure. Third on the list, continue to closely rate and monitor the condition of our natural waterways through condition reports, for the studies that are determining the amount of pollutants that are currently in our waterways, through total maximum daily load studies, as well as our MS4 reports. So our municipal stormwater, split sewer stormwater reports that continue those health checkups. That really ensures strategic investment of the dollars that we do receive. So when we do receive those necessary funds, that we're using those funds in the most cost-effective manner for the largest bang for our buck, as it were. And then the fourth item there on the list, to garner data and quantify current budget utilization and forecast for future needs. Asset management, good asset management to be strategic with the built stormwater infrastructure investment is absolutely critical. And next slide. Cruising through this. Sorry, I'm gonna. Yep. So as I said, the stormwater portion of the infrastructure report card can be found along with the other chapters in the assessed. For more information about ASCE and our infrastructure and the report card, you can visit the links that you see there on the screen. Go ahead, next slide. Yeah, in summation, one, I would like to say thank you to the many partners that we had for drafting the stormwater report, for the report card, help from the Department of Safety and Professional Services, very much so from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, to help us garner data about MS4 reports, as well as many of the different research initiatives that are going on all over the state. It was really a great partnership and chance to sit down with many qualified professionals that are doing absolutely the best they can. So in summation, currently, much of the state's stormwater infrastructure is meeting the needs of Wisconsinites, building that foundation of a growing economy and keeping our citizens safe and healthy, but without expanded use of asset management, an additional focus on innovating to meet those future needs of our society and increase funding, these trends really won't continue. And with that, I will pass it back to you, Micki. Sorry, I probably finished a few minutes early.
That's great. Thank you. That means we'll have more time for questions and answers.
Yep.
As I said, thank you very much for your informative presentation. And we are now looking at the grade that Dan's received. And as you can see, it was a C+, which is in between good, adequate for now, and mediocre, which requires attention. Next slide, please. I will now tell you about Seth Johnson, a professional engineer, lead author of dams, and Vik Verma, a professional engineer licensed in Texas, co-author of Author of Dams. Sorry about that. Seth Johnson is lead author of the Dam Chapter of the ASCE 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card. He has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from UW-Platteville and a MS in Structural Engineering from Michigan Technological University. Seth is employed by Jacobs Engineering in their Appleton, Wisconsin office He has 9 years of structural engineering experience and is licensed in 5 states. Next slide, please. Vik Verma, professional engineer licensed in Texas, and is a structural engineer and serves as a member of the ASCE Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card Committee. He has served in many ASCE roles over the last 25 years in both Texas and Wisconsin. As VP of Presidential Affairs, the ASCE Texas Infrastructure Report Card Committee was part of his scope, and the report card was updated during his tenure in 2012. Vik has participated in advocacy at the local, state, and national levels. Vik Verma will now give the presentation on dams. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Ann, and thanks again to the League of Women Voters for having me speak today. Go ahead to the next slide. So as Ann had mentioned, that the grade for dams is a C+. The overall report card is a C, so it's slightly better than the overall state of infrastructure in Wisconsin, but not by a lot, but it's a little bit over C, so we'll say slightly above average. Next slide. So as with all the other sections, that we have 6 criteria that we grade dams on. And really, when we think about dams, we look at dams as structures that provide recreational areas, fish and other wildlife habitat, hydroelectric power, a water source for agricultural operations, navigation, wetland restoration, and flood control. So dams are very important for just recreation, our environment, conservation, and our overall economy. So they matter a lot, and they're very important. So, you know, when we talk about capacity, we want to know how many dams we have and how many are operational. Condition, you know, are they structurally adequate, or are they at risk of failure? Operation, maintenance, and funding. It's not, as with any type of infrastructure, it's the costs don't end when you build the structure. They continue with maintenance, and maintenance over many years can be far more expensive. Public safety and resilience, obviously this is a #1 priority, because we want the public to be safe, and we want our structures to last. It's more safety is obviously important and comes first, and we also want our structures to last. Future needs, as with everything else, nothing stays the same. Population growth, to be honest, our changing environment and other factors demand that we address future needs. And finally, innovation. Are we innovating in the area of dams? And because we need to be, because in many ways, to meet future needs, innovation is going to be a critical aspect of that. Next slide. So to give you an idea of the capacity, as you can see here, the Department of Natural Resources has a database of dams, and you can see there's 3,900 dams in the state of Wisconsin. Of the dams in the state, there are 120 dams that generate hydropower. In addition, we have over 1,000 dams in our national inventory that are federal. And then we also have 1,160 dams that are classified as large dams. And a large dam, to give you an idea of what a large dam is well, I'll just go to the next slide. Okay, so as you can see, we want to look at what the high hazard potential is and where we need to be fixing things. So you can see that 198 dams are high hazard potential. So these are dams that need to be addressed, because they can, you know, if they don't work, we can have some catastrophic consequences. And that's about 5% of our total dams. Right below that would be significant, not as high, but still worth noting. And we're at about 102, and that's 2.6%. And then about 20% are low hazard potential. And then as far as state regulated dams, we have 143 that are classified as high hazard potential. Next slide. So as far as funding, in order to maintain our dams and make sure that they're working properly, we need to have an equivalent staffing of 6.25 full-time staffers at the state, and that's what we have. We have 500 per the state. We have $500,000 allocated for removal, about $3.5 million allocated for work on municipally owned dams, of which that we have quite a few in Wisconsin, and then another $750,000 budgeted for dam safety. Next slide. And so if you look at how much we spend on dams here in Wisconsin, we spend about $200 more per dam than they do on average at the national level. So we are doing better compared to other states, as you can see by this graph. Next slide. So as far as the future needs and resilience, we need more frequent inspections and analysis. You know, we're anticipating additional rainfall needs. In fact, we anticipate that actually since 1950, annual precipitation has increased by 10% or 3 inches. So, you know, over time, that's led to some additional stresses and pressure in dams because there's loads on the dam due to this rainfall. And that over time, that load can make the structure weaker. And so this is why we need more frequent inspections, because as designs continue through their shelf life, they've been weathered pretty significantly. We do, as far as emergency action plans, there's increased funding required to review these plans to make sure that, and education materials, to make sure that they're meeting the needs of Wisconsinites in future conditions and being able to address past conditions. Again, conducting regular inspections and considering projects where repair, reinforcement, or improvement of resilience are needed. And having a plan for that. And then also having an emergency action plan for dams. Basically, in general, having these EAPs does help increase resilience. Next slide. In terms of where we're at in terms of public safety, operation, and maintenance, we have 72 dams, high hazard dams that are scheduled for inspection. 65 were inspected. We have 23 high hazard dams per FTE, full-time equivalent. And then we have 94%, and 94% of our high hazard state regulated dams have an emergency action plan. Obviously, we would like to have all of them have an EAP and make sure that all of our high hazard dams that have been scheduled for the inspection actually be inspected. Next slide. As far as innovation, we basically have 2 areas that we've targeted. You know, we have removed 76 dams in the state of Wisconsin in the last 20 years, so dams don't necessarily last forever. These dams are, in many cases, low head dams with a maximum water depth of about 25 feet. They'd outlived their purpose or were in such a state of disrepair that removing the dam was less expensive than rehabilitating it. Dam removal can improve water quality, expand wildlife habitat, and alleviate the use of resources for inspecting and maintaining the dam. A prime example is that 4 dams on the Baraboo River were removed between 1997 and 2001. This was initiated due to safety concerns about the dams. These subsequent removals have resulted in better recreational fishing, habitat restoration, and savings for the city of Baraboo. Next slide. As far as recommendations, educating government officials on the increased need for maintenance and rehabilitation funding. It's always important to have conversations with our officials to advise them of these needs. Providing and increasing state and federal funding and staffing for regular dam inspections, same dam safety programs, and repair and removal grants. Basically, you know, as you know, we had the first vote yesterday on the infrastructure bill, and as bills are, things come down to money, and so money is important here as well. And then updating our emergency action plans for all high and significant hazard dams, make sure that they're keeping up, and then we're making sure that they're safe structures. Next slide. And that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to Ann.
Thank you very much, Vik, for the informative presentation on dams. Both the stormwater and dams presentations and the report card chapters you wrote help us better understand the current condition of Wisconsin's stormwater and dams. After hearing from our panel, we will welcome your participation in the conversation about how to raise the grade for stormwater and dams. And remember that you can put questions in the chat. Now we transition to our panel. Next slide, please. Our first panel member is Laura Herrick from the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. Laura Herrick is a professional engineer, and in her role as the Chief Environmental Engineer for the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, she manages a staff of 9 with specialties in engineering, planning, and biology. She has 26 years of experience in the water resources field, specializing in hydrologic and hydraulic modeling, water resources engineering, water quality analysis, and floodplain and stormwater management. Ms. Herrick received her BSce degree from Valparaiso University, MS in Civil Engineering degree from the University of Minnesota. She is a registered professional engineer in Wisconsin and a certified floodplain manager. Let's welcome Laura Herrick. Next slide.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Just want to, for those that don't know anything about SEWRPAC, talk a little bit about what a regional planning commission, what we do. And the slide up here kind of shows you where we are in the state. We're 5% of the state area, but 35% of the population in this part of the state, quite a growing part of the state as well. We are the official area-wide planning agency for this 7-county region. We were created in 1960, and we're a very large regional planning commission with about 65 staff in total. And we're really, our focus is on regional plans. So plans that go beyond a corporate boundary, you know, beyond a county, beyond a city, and look at those in detail. We were one of the first to start doing watershed plans. We also are the state designated area-wide water quality management planning agency. And you can see the variety of long-range planning we do, including flooding management, environmental corridors, natural areas, probably being closer to the focus here. Now it's kind of wide open. I think I can just give a couple of remarks on what we do. We do a lot of riverine flooding work, a lot of modeling work, some stormwater planning help for our communities. I consider our communities our clients, so to speak. We are currently working on a regional chloride study as well, and we've been measuring chloride levels in about 40 different streams in our 7-county area. As I listen to the talks today, trying to relate it to what I've heard from our communities, I think there's a lot of interest in these larger storm events we are seeing. A lot of our stormwater infrastructure was only built for what we call the 5-year or the 10-year event. You've probably heard that. And that's a smaller storm than what we're seeing now. So where is that ultimate flow path? If it can't fit through the stormwater infrastructure, where does that water go? That's of great interest to a lot of the communities, and they're working hard on that. We're also very interested in trying to keep more of our rainwater on site, on an individual lot before it gets into the stormwater system. And that's, where green infrastructure comes into play. Although I do want to make the point that green infrastructure often is not a flood control solution. It handles the smaller storm events. It depends on what the green infrastructure project is, but a lot of them are for smaller events for water quality, but they do help. Everything helps. The more we can keep water on site, it helps. And also, we want to develop smarter. We want to stay away from our rivers. We want to give the water the place to move. And that's probably a big focus of what we do at the Planning Commission, is related to land use and how we develop. And I think that's all I had.
Thank you very much, Laura Herrick, for your informative remarks. Next, I will introduce Micki Klappa-Sullivan. Next slide, please. Micki Klappa-Sullivan is the Manager of Engineering Planning at the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, responsible for the planning for the water reclamation, conveyance, water course facilities, asset management, and coordination with our 28 municipal partners. She has a civil engineering degree from Marquette University and has over 30 years of experience, 7 with the district. Micki is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Wisconsin and in sustainability professional. Let's welcome Micki Klappa-Sullivan. Next slide, please.
Thanks so much, Ann. The Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District provides conveyance, storage, and treatment of wastewater for the 28 municipalities Ann mentioned. Those are in 5 counties in the greater Milwaukee area, so for approximately 1.1 million people. But besides wastewater, we are also responsible for flood management in our service area. For myself, as the Manager of Engineering Planning, besides what Ann mentioned, I also oversee all municipal coordination, which includes the review and approval of sanitary sewer plans in our service area and all stormwater management plans and green infrastructure plans in our planning area. So this work is required under Chapter 13 rule, which requires runoff control for developments that increase impervious surface by over 1/2 of an acre, or redevelopment that disturbs more than 2 acres. And in 2019, we added a green infrastructure requirement, and we found that a lot of smaller projects that were under that 1/2 acre threshold were still adding a lot of impervious surface to our service area and our planning area, and that work was, the impervious area is increasing the runoff that was coming off the site. And so we added a rule that if you add 5,000 square feet of impervious surface and up to 1/2 of an acre, you are required to install green infrastructure. And why are we doing this? So this rule provides direction for managing stormwater where it falls, which is a lot of our focus. And it really focuses on water quantity. We don't address water quality. I mentioned that we're responsible for the flood management, which includes, our flood management work includes removing structures from floodplains, naturalizing channels, and providing for flood storage. And so the Chapter 13 rules really coincide with that work. If we can keep the stormwater on the site where it was before the development occurred, and we're not running off faster, we're really protecting all of our flood management projects and controlling that water before it gets to the rivers. And that also keeps the stormwater from getting into our sanitary sewer system, so which would be called inflow. So if we have a lot of stormwater running off of a new development and it can get into the road, it can get into the sanitary sewer, and then that could contribute to overflows, both our combined sewer and our separate sewer area, and that impacts the water quality of the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Micki Klappa-Sullivan, for your informative remarks. Next, we will hear from Chin Liao, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Dr. Chin Liao obtained his PhD degree from Cornell University, and then he joined the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in 2005. He is currently an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Dr. Liao's research interest is in the area of environmental fluid mechanics, hydrological processes, modeling the coupled physical, chemical, biological processes in aquatic ecosystems. His research program at UWM has attracted more than $2 million in research funding from various sources, including the NSF, NOAA, US Navy, and the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Dr. Liao is currently the director of the Water Equipment and Policy Center, an NSF-funded industry university cooperative research center. Let's welcome Professor Liao. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for the League of Women Voters. So today I just want to talk a bit about the stormwater research. So as you can see, our stormwater infrastructure is not performing very well, and at the same time, perfect storm of climate change, political pressure, and economic downturn is brewing. And many of the states, including Wisconsin, are facing challenges in stormwater control and management. That being said, challenges also bring opportunities, as there will be a real need to drive smart and resilient investment to modernize our stormwater infrastructure. There are also real needs for scientific research and technology breakthrough for cost-effective and sustainable solutions. And for example, the green infrastructure is one cost-effective and resilient approach for stormwater management. And green infrastructure, what is it? According to EPA, a green infrastructure refers to a range of measures that can use the plant or soil systems, permeable pavement, or landscaping to store, to infiltrate or evapotranspirate stormwater and reduce the flows to our conventional gray infrastructure, which are piped drainage and water treatment systems. The Water Equipment and Policy Research Center is a collaboration between the UW-Milwaukee and the Marquette University, funded by the National Science Foundation and industrial members, including Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District and Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The center conducts research in water sensors, novel materials treatment technologies, and water policy studies. And stormwater control is one very important research thrust of the center. And in many projects has been conducted at UW-Milwaukee and Marquette, focusing on green infrastructure. So I just want to share two of my research projects in this area. And the first project is the collaboration with MMSD and Digital ID, a company that makes advanced green roof modules. And green roof is currently an underutilized measure for urban stormwater management compared to other green infrastructures such as detention basins, rain gardens, permeable pavements, and so on. And this is largely due to the fact that there's a lack of data to evaluate how a green roof performs hydrologically. So in this project, we installed Visual ID's advanced green roof modules on MMSD's headquarters building, and we developed the sensors to measure the hydrological performance. And after that, an empirical model was then developed based on our measurements to quantify the benefits of green roof installation and potential impact on the urban water cycle under various storm conditions. So following project, my research group is currently exploring other benefits that can be added to the green roof systems. For example, we're exploring the technology called the plant microbial fuel cell that uses the living plants of the green roof and the bacterial to generate electricity. So in the future, we hope that it's possible that a green roof can not only help to control stormwater, but also produce energy at the same time. And another of my recent green infrastructure research is actually related to North American beavers and how they may help us on resilience to climate change. And before the European settlement in Wisconsin, the fur trade in the 17th century, beavers were very abundant in the Milwaukee River Basin and all other Wisconsin watersheds. And now they are nearly extinct in the Milwaukee area, and their population continues to shrinking across the state as well as the nation. Beavers are engineers of nature because they build dams which can create wetlands and slow down the stream flows. Many studies have shown that beaver and their ponds can bring tremendous benefits to the ecosystem by promoting biodiversity, reducing nutrients and sediments load in the runoff, and mitigate flood flows. We have recently completed a project with the support from Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District and the Milwaukee River Keeper to study the potential benefits of flood abatement by restoring beavers in the Milwaukee River watershed. And using GIS-based ecological models, we have identified 52 locations that are ideal for beaver to survive and with least conflict with the landowners, farms, and roads. In these locations, we create modeled beaver dams structures and to establish relations among the inflow, storage, and outflow. And these beaver dam models were incorporated into the hydrological model that simulates the year-round rainfall runoff and the stream flow processes of the entire watershed. So model simulations were conducted with storm events in the past 10 years. We will have data, and also engineering design storms, both with and without beavers. According to our model study, the results suggest that beaver dams, which are largely dispersed in the upper tributaries, that can potentially mitigate flood flows in urban flood zones at the lower end of the watershed. And specifically, flood peak flows, for example, the Glendale River flood zones can be reduced by 7 to 30%, depending on the spatial temporal variation of the actual storm event. So this study just shows that beaver restoration can be another cost-effective and sustainable solution for climate resilience, and help us to reduce the budget for our future investment in stormwater infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chin Liao, for your informative remarks. Now let's meet our next panelist, Tanya Lorigan, Dam Safety Specialist with the Wisconsin DNR. Next slide, please. Tanya Lorigan, a professional engineer, is the Dam Safety and Floodplain Mapping Section Chief for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Tanya oversees responsibilities of the Dam Safety Program. The program is responsible for dam inspections, emergency response assistance, and regulatory matters related to the design, construction, and safety of dams in Wisconsin. Let's welcome Tanya Lorigan. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Ann. So you can see from the slide here, the Dam Safety Program at the DNR, our goal is to promote safety and to protect life, health, and property from unsafe dams. And the staff in our program are really quite committed to that goal. I wanted to share that there are effective current standards and core work goals in place to support resilience with dams. That being said, Wisconsin is like many other states with our aging infrastructure and the need to continually maintain and repair dams, which is why these standards are so important. What I wanted to share today is just to take a few minutes and explain some of the things in terms of current standards that we have with our program. And how we help to support resiliency. One of the items that we do is there is a requirement that dam owners need to inspect their dams on a regular basis and after any high water event to look for changes that may indicate the need for repairs or even the existence of serious deficiencies that, if left unaddressed, could result in the failure of the dam. So DNR staff in the Dam Safety Program, we confirm that the inspections are conducted, that work orders, work directives are completed. There's also the authority to issue drawdowns when necessary, drawdowns of that impoundment to, to promote safety and to improve the safety of dams in Wisconsin and offer greater resilience to those downstream communities. The other thing that happens in our program is that we actually actively review plans and specifications that are submitted by dam owners or their engineering consultants for activities related to the dams, such as repair, reconstruction, maintenance, and even removal of the dams. And again, this is all focused on that goal of improving the aging dam infrastructure. Some of these projects are grant funded, which I will mention in a few minutes about the grants in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, but a lot of them are either locally funded through like a municipally owned dam, or private owners are responsible for coming up with those funds themselves. Some of the other things that we do is we review emergency action plans and inspection, operation, and maintenance plans. And in essence, an EAP, an emergency action plan, it's sort of a flow chart, a guide of what to do if a dam were to fail. Who gets the first notification? Who gets contacted? Are there people downstream that need to be notified? So that's a requirement for every large dam in Wisconsin. And we also are involved with reviewing and ensuring that inspection, operation, and maintenance plans are completed for dams, which basically spells out exactly that, what type of inspection needs to happen, what components get inspected, how's the dam operated, and what's regular maintenance for the structure. Finally, another thing that we do is we review dam failure analyses. And what that analysis does, it's an engineering analysis, and it looks at if the dam were to fail during a 100-year flood event, where's that water going to go downstream and how high is that going to get? And one of the features I think that's pretty unique and positive in Wisconsin is that the local communities downstream are actually required to adopt that into their floodplain zoning ordinances to limit or restrict development within that hydraulic shadow of the dam. So those are a number of activities that are kind of core work functions of our program. Some of the other proactive measures that happen within our program is that since about 2009, the legislature has pretty consistently provided $4 million in grant funding for 2 grant programs that we have. A municipal dam grant that is available to municipalities, tribes, lake districts to either repair or remove their dams. And then we have a dam removal grant program that's available for private owners or any dam owner essentially to remove their dams. So that money has been fully subscribed essentially every grant cycle. I have to say this year we're pretty excited. This year's budget, we have $10 million that will be going towards these grants for grant funding. So we're looking forward to working with owners to be able to facilitate that assistance. And then some other things that we do is, again, the focus on education and outreach in terms of providing quarterly newsletters to dam owners, other fact sheets. We do get involved with providing on-site technical assistance, emergency response assistance. And we also promote wetland restoration and hydrologic reconnection for flood storage and reduction of peak flows. So we've got a lot of great things that we're already doing, but similar to what the ASCE report card recommends, there's always additional efforts, that can further resilience with dams, like was mentioned in terms of continuing education. Increased funding and increased staffing is always a positive. And keeping those EAPs updated and current and getting as many of the dams, the large dams in Wisconsin, having those complete. So that's a snapshot of what the DNR Dam Safety Program does. And I'll pass it back to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya Lurigan, for your informative remarks. Next, we will hear from Peter Wood. Next slide, please. I already have it, so thank you, Daniel. Peter Wood is a professional engineer, a water resources engineer with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. He has worked for the DNR since 1991 and has been with the Stormwater program since 1998. Currently, Pete reviews erosion control management plans for projects in Southeast Wisconsin. Let's welcome Peter Wood.
Thanks, Ann, and thanks for having me. I'm just going to give a quick summary of how the stormwater program works at the Department of Natural Resources. We regulate stormwater as it is a stormwater pollutant, not so much as a flooding standpoint. So rain falls on the urban environment, it carries pollutants with it, and those pollutants end up in our water resources, our rivers, lakes, streams, and wetlands. The whole goal of our permitting program is to try to minimize impacts of stormwater runoff on our wonderful water resources. We've been doing it for about 25 years now, so that's relatively new as far as a regulatory program at DNR goes. So what we do is we issue permits to various entities. Those permits require those entities to implement what we call stormwater best management practices. And those best management practices are designed or intended to control and reduce the discharge of pollutants to our waterways. There's 3 branches to our program. We regulate construction sites, certain industrial facilities, and then municipalities, municipal stormwater discharges. MS4 is something that Jake mentioned. So I'm going to primarily talk about those MS4s. We have about 250 of them, permitted entities in the state of Wisconsin. They're in most of our urban centers: Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, Wausau, La Crosse, etc. So, you know, unfortunately, these municipalities are given a tough burden when we do various watershed studies. Jake mentioned impaired waterways. We've identified many impaired waterways, and those are ones that need help to meet our goals. And unfortunately, a lot of these municipalities are in these impaired waterways and have been determined to be a major source to the impairment. So our permits ask them to do some heavy lifting to try to improve our waterways. And mostly it's the older development, let's say, you know, older than 25 years. So anytime you have an older community with old land use, you know, we're dealing with sins of the past. You know, stormwater management wasn't done very much prior to 25 years ago. We're doing a much better job now, but the municipalities are forced to deal with these old parts of town, and they're supposed to remove pollutants in whatever way they possibly can. And it takes some time and it takes money. And I think Jake mentioned that also. So we do have a grant program at DNR for these municipalities. Unfortunately, it's only about $1 to $2 million a year. We can fund approximately 20 to 30 projects per year, which seems like a lot, but unfortunately, when municipalities do the studies and determine what is actually needed to meet our requirements, many of them need to do 20 to 30 projects on their own. So you can imagine when we're only funding 20 to 30 projects across the state per year, and each community needs 20 to 30 projects, you can imagine how long it'll take. So I'm here to advocate for support of municipal revenue sources for stormwater utilities and other sources of revenue, also possibly increasing the state contribution to municipalities and also federal funding. So I really hope people can support these efforts to increase funding, because it's going to be very, very difficult for the municipalities under the current condition to make the real progress we need to get where we need with stormwater treatment, and also maintaining the practices that have been installed over the years and the new practices, which is also another significant drain on municipal budgets. That's what I have.
Thank you very much, Peter Wood, for your informative remarks. Next slide, please. Thank you to our Stormwater and Dams panel members for the excellent information you provided today. Laura Herrick, Chief Environmental Engineer with the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Committee. Micki Klappa-Sullivan, Manager of Engineering Planning with Milwaukee Municipal Sewerage District. Professor Chin Liao, Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UWM. Tanya Lorigan, Dam Safety Engineer with the Wisconsin DNR. And Peter Wood, Water Resources Engineer with the Wisconsin DNR. Next, we will move to our Q&A portion. Next slide, please. A brief reminder of the Q&A process. Now, audience, it's your opportunity to ask ASCE authors and panelists your questions. Please use the chat to ask your questions and let us know to whom to direct the question. Laura Gintz with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin will be monitoring the chat. Please keep questions and comments to no more than 1 minute so more can participate. Thank you, Laura. She will let us know when we reach the last question.
Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate that. The first question in the chat is from Robert, who is with Christine Reed. He had a question, I believe. he did not place it in the chat. So would you like to unmute and ask the question yourself, Robert?
I apologize. Robert had to leave and he didn't get his question in the chat, but maybe another time, or he'll follow up by email.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Christine. We will move on to the next question then. The next question is from Pat Eggert for Jake Brunoehler. The question is, how much does stormwater management relate to ag land and the attempt to improve farming practices to reduce runoff and improve the ability of the soil to retain rainfall, and on the effort to reduce the amount of impervious surfaces in urban areas, like parking areas that can let water percolate through?
That's a loaded question. There's a lot to unpack in that. So I would tell you that, I mean, there's certainly some really great people that we have on this panel that would be much more able to answer the agricultural kind of side to that. I will tell you that the updated regulatory requirements for updated development, any local landowner, anyone within a given urban or even suburban watershed, especially Madison and Milwaukee areas, the push and requirements for green infrastructure and good BMP maintenance is very much real. That we're seeing local landowners that are strongly encouraged and required to add these impervious surfaces, or these pervious surfaces in lieu of impervious surfaces, to mitigate the runoff before it's ever even created. So by utilizing green infrastructure, as well as many different rainwater and stormwater reuse systems, there's some really good things that are happening. As far as agricultural goes, I do know that there are cover crop programs, that there are stormwater trading programs and efforts that do happen with local farmers all over the state, where farmers are financially incentivized to do the right thing, to have, to mitigate the impacts of erosion towards pollutant runoff that would impair and impact our waterways in a great, highly impactful way.
All right, thank you so much, Jake. Our next question is also for you from Carol Terrell. What is green infrastructure and what is its role in removing litter, chemicals, and sediment from stormwater? And how long does green infrastructure remain effective?
I think, Laura, that Carol decided that Laura should answer that question.
Go Valpo.
Yeah, what are the chances, hey?
I know, right?
Let's see. I think as far as, so am I taking, okay. We've just, we're working on a plan right now for the Oak Creek watershed and have taken another good look at green infrastructure and its ability to remove pollutants. Some are better than others, and unfortunately there's not a lot of data on actual systems in place in the field. It's more lab related things, but it does show good promise, especially for sediment, and that's been proven for a long time. As far as pollutants, especially dissolved phosphorus, there's looking at a lot of stuff now, especially coming out of Minnesota, is looking at amendments or iron filings to remove dissolved phosphorus. So there's good things happening out there. We're learning a lot. Unfortunately, green infrastructure looks like it might add fecals through bird waste and others. So that's still a work in progress of something we'd like to reduce. But I hope that, and litter, I don't know, I don't really think about green infrastructure for removing litter as much. I don't think that's as much its purpose, but it does happen somewhat. That's where things get caught, especially in the boulevard green infrastructure. I know City of Milwaukee says that's a big problem. They become kind of a litter collector. That's probably all I have, but anyone else is welcome to chime in.
I'll add one thing to that. As I say, Wisconsinites and even specifically folks from Milwaukee can take a little bit of point of pride too, that there are some local companies that are kind of leading the charge towards better data. If you look up a company called P4 Infrastructure, they're a local tech startup that is implementing systems at low cost that garner and generate real-time stormwater data of systems that are installed in the field. So for instance, I believe Johnson Controls, I think, is one of the sites that's implemented one of these stormwater systems, that it's capturing data at different points within its green infrastructure systems and triggering real-time data and metrics on whether or not that system is healthy, whether it's functioning, how it's doing given different rain events, so that the idea is that your site-specific, your small site rainwater and stormwater systems will basically send you a notification that says, hey, I need to be cleaned, I need maintenance, versus you having to hire someone to come out all the time to assess whether or not those systems are working, whether or not it's raining or not. So stormwater is so unpredictable, it's hard to really determine when the best time to look at a stormwater system might be. But if you can implement systems that are activated in real time, you can garner some really, really good data that gives you a much more intelligent look and a smarter look at how these systems are functioning. So that's happening right here in Wisconsin.
I would like to add that at MMSD, when we pay for green infrastructure, we use a 20-year easement on the green infrastructure, and with proper maintenance and care, they can last a very long time. So we anticipate 20 years as a minimum.
This is Pete. I was just going to add, the debate about what green infrastructure is real similar to the debate we had before this conference on what stormwater is, right? Because there's many different definitions, but I think the one that most people fall on is anything other than directly piping stormwater to a river, lake, or stream. So, I mean, it's any management system that results in a positive benefit can be construed as green infrastructure. So I think that's kind of where I think we've arrived at of late.
Thank you, Pete. And this is a conversation. So to the panelists, if a question isn't directly addressed to you, but you have something to add, please do so. Thank you. Take it away, Laura.
All right, our next question is from Susan Johnson, and she also directed this one to Jake Brunoehler. She said, in addition to the use of salt for snow removal, what are some of the other main issues you're seeing in Wisconsin that impairs our stormwater infrastructure?
I'll start that conversation. There's a lot of other perspectives of the challenges, because it all depends on where you are and what the impairments to your local water bodies are. I will tell you that here in the Fox River Valley watershed, I know that phosphorus contributing to algae blooms, especially on Lake Winnebago and the Fox River system, definitely is something that is of huge concern locally here. And I don't think that that's exclusive to this area. That's certainly something that continues to be a challenge across the entire state. And with aging stormwater infrastructure, something we don't always think about with stormwater is infiltration and inflow, where a leaky stormwater system 25 years ago wasn't a big deal. But now when we think about water getting to places it's not supposed to be, especially in our separated stormwater systems, when we're seeing peak flows, the more we can keep rainwater and stormwater at the point where it's generated, the better off we're going to be. So if we start getting conveyance systems that are picking up groundwater and taking that where it's not supposed to be, that's not ideal either. So I would say that aging infrastructure causing infiltration and inflow. And I think someone has even mentioned PFAS. PFAS, I always struggle with that word, chlorofluoral substances, man-made substances that we can't treat for, is certainly something that continues to be a challenge, and we don't have good solutions for it yet.
This is Pete. I might as well add in, just to take off on what you're saying, Jake, that in most of Wisconsin, the waterways that are listed as impaired for sediment and phosphorus, because we have a phosphorus standard in Wisconsin and it's unique in the country. But some in the Milwaukee area, the Milwaukee River, are listed as impaired for bacteria. And as you mentioned, and this is coming in the future, a lot of these waterways in the urban areas are going to be listed as impaired for chloride, which is a salt issue. Those are the main elements that we're focused on.
Yeah, and along with that, everyone always talks about sediment. It's more than just dirt. There's the dirt and the pollutants that are contained within that sediment. A lot of times, most of our heavy metals and very toxic chemicals get particulate bound. So those heavy metals and pollutants grab onto those dirt particles, those sediment particles that end up in our stormwater runoff. And that's what really can be toxic to those downstream systems, to our rivers, lakes, and streams, is those pollutants and nefarious chemicals that were really never meant to be coming off of oil and grease, and you know, runoff from roadways that carry with it a myriad of different chemicals from our vehicles that really just destroy those downstream systems.
All right, thank you so much. Our next question is from Michael Goodman. He is asking, he has directed this as well to Jake, but if somebody else would like to take it, they're more than welcome to. Has Wisconsin had any real problems with sinkholes, geologic ones in limestone, bedrock, collapsing in Wisconsin, like often occurs in Florida?
I am a stormwater engineer, and that's what my specialty is. I'm not a geology specialist, but I will tell you, by having some family in Florida, it certainly has gotten me to dig into the issue. Thankfully, Wisconsin in general it is highly unlikely that we're going to get the kind of the larger sinkholes that you think of when you think of some sort of major event of a sinkhole. We do get some, but it has to do with the dolomite versus limestone that causes those much larger sinkholes down in Florida that we just don't really see that much here in Wisconsin. The sinkholes that we all think of are just oversized potholes from aging infrastructure. So that's an underfunded infrastructure. Those are not real sinkholes. Those are just really big potholes.
Right, thank you. Our next question is for Louise Petering. Does siltation behind a dam affect resilience?
So this is Tanya Lorigan at the DNR Dam Safety Program. I could speak to that. What I would say is generally with the siltation behind a dam, it doesn't necessarily affect the resilience. When the dam is kind of calculated for its capacity, its ability to flat pass flow, that's kind of designed into that original computation when designing the dam. So from that aspect, I don't believe that the siltation really kind of affects the resilience. I would say, obviously, it affects recreation, aesthetics, those types of factors. One situation where I could say that it might have an effect is that when you do start to see siltation in the impoundment or in that pond, you can start to affect gates. So if people aren't regularly testing their gates or operating those gates, that siltation can start to plug that and render it inoperable. That could be a situation where if you're having a flood event and people aren't able to operate those gates to release flow, that could cause like an early overtopping of the dam, that type of aspect. So from that aspect, I would say yes, it could affect the resilience or the capacity of the dam.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. The next question is from Dorothy Sky, and it is directed to both Jake and Vik. How do I find out the status of dams and stormwater management in my area? And how do I assess whether or not responsible government officials are proactively planning and submitting winning grants to every possible funding source?
I suppose I could kick that off. There's as part of our MS4 program, there's an annual reporting that does have to occur where municipalities that are tasked with stewardship over over their stormwater infrastructure and the runoff created from those municipalities, they do have reporting to the DNR as well as stormwater management programs along with that. So those reports are usually published on city websites where you can engage with your city engineers, village engineers, and really determine exactly what those stormwater management plans look like given the different municipalities. Some of that information is usually easier to find depending on what the webmaster's current position it looks like within each municipality. So not every city has that information as easy to find as others, but it's certainly publicly available. So depending on where you are.
I would echo Jake on the dam side, particularly with local jurisdictions, many who operate dams themselves, so they'll be able to have information on that. I would, needless to say, defer to Tanya for a larger discussion on that. I know a lot of the information we got on dams, or most of the information we got on dams, was from the DNR. So I'll defer to Tanya for any other discussion on that.
Thanks, Vik. What I can say in terms of the status of dams, right now, we do have on our website a spreadsheet. So if individuals wanted to access that, download it, it is a query of the dams in the state. We are in the process actually of getting that a little bit more current. It's been a couple of years since it's been updated on the website. Once we get that on available, the new and improved version, that is something that we are going to be spelling out, whether EAPs are completed, when was the year it was completed, are they compliant, not compliant with various aspects in terms of kind of regulations for the dams. So when that comes out, I think that will be an improved service. I think that would be a way then you could easily kind of do a search, or if there's a particular county that you're looking for, that you would be able to get that status, you know, anywhere in regions across the state. But I would agree with Vik that, you know, local government officials or local communities, because many dams are municipally owned, that they would either be able to share information about the status of their dams, or if the dams are in their communities, they would have that information. And of course, reaching out to the DNR as well for any general info you might be looking for.
I can add something to Jake as far as the MS4 reporting goes. You're exactly right. All of these permitted 250 entities are submitting annual reports to DNR every spring. And because we've gone to kind of like an e-permitting system, those reports are available to anyone online. If you went to the DNR website and typed in water permits, it would take you to a site where you could actually get access to what's submitted by the municipalities every year. So that's one way that any citizen can get information on what your municipality is up to. The MS4 permit also does require not just a public outreach, but public involvement. So they are supposed to actively be seeking input from the citizens. Like what Jake mentioned, not just, you know, telling people we have this annual report, but actually getting input from the citizens. And that's the only way we can actually make progress, is to get everyone involved. And I think Jake's done a good point of emphasizing that. So.
Right, our next question is from Michael Goodman, and it is also directed at Vik. How many old dams are still present on Wisconsin's smaller streams, which could and should be removed to the benefit of the stream's drainage basin areas?
To be honest, Michael, I don't have a real answer to that question. Do you know, Tanya?
Yeah, Vik, I was going to offer to take this one if you'd like. So one of the things that Vik was sharing when he spoke is that there's about 1,000 large dams in Wisconsin and about 3,900 in our database. So large dams are based on the structural height of the dam and how much water it impounds. So, you know, if you take the 3,900 in the database, subtract the 1,000, you can see there's a lot of them that have smaller structural heights. They impound less water. So I think you might be potentially asking about those types of dams. Really how it works, I don't have a set number for you, but what I can say is that a lot of these dams, you know, if they're privately owned, it's really up to the owner to decide whether they want to keep the dam or remove the dam. Our program just wants to see that it's safe and that it's well maintained. So if they choose to remove those, some of the typical reasons that we see for removal is people may not have the financial capability or wherewithal to continue to maintain that dam, or they've recognized that it's past its useful life, that it's just the original original purpose of the dam really no longer exists. So at that point, when people kind of reach that repair versus removal decision, that's where we see some of these smaller dams or smaller streams that they tend to move towards removal of those structures. But in terms of giving you a set number of how many, I don't really have that number, but that's kind of the thought processes that go into when those dams get removed.
Much, Tanya. Our next question is from Susan Johnson. In terms of development, how much is considered sustainable in terms of stormwater at the current time?
Ooh, I'll try. Who wants to go first? Okay, I'll try first. We look a lot at development, and I think speaking to new development, most of the communities have really good requirements for stormwater control. I'm thinking more from a flood perspective for new development. There's usually a requirement after development to hold back enough water so it matches something before development. Probably for us, the biggest thing is current areas. And how can we retrofit in or reduce the impervious surface on areas that are currently developed. And I think one that's, and also we tend to recommend compact development. So we'd like to see, the development be in a smaller area and protect the natural area around it. That's something that we've promoted in our 2050 vision extensively to try to minimize that impervious footprint for stormwater. One thing that I know a lot of communities are starting to look at is the requirement for parking spaces for, malls and things of that nature, where you see half the lot never being used because their number of parking spaces was based on their busiest day of the year. And I think there's a big push now to, do we need that? When that a lot of what would you call malls or strip malls are kind of vacant right now. Do we need all that parking, or could we pull some of it back out, or do pervious pavement, or do something different? I think that's going to be really valuable for all the communities to consider going forward. So I'll pass it off if anyone else wants to say more.
I'll echo that. I mean, I will say that based on my role as a stormwater device manufacturer's representative, I actually work with a lot of developers and stakeholders on projects that are doing those new developments and helping those stakeholders meet those stormwater challenges and goals and requirements. And so I will tell you that it is those goals are lofty when it comes to new development. That the amount of stewardship that is put on these developers is very real and good for that kind of stewardship. As much as it is to some extent it's forced upon them, it's good for everybody. So it's best that it occurs. And on top of that, the growing awareness towards now that we've been doing some of these stormwater protocols, we've been implementing some of these initiatives now for the better part of a decade or more, 2 decades. Some of those systems that were installed in the early years of that are starting to get near their life cycle. So the good operations and maintenance and replacement protocols now are going to be part of those discussions as well, where owners that have had a 20-year stormwater system will see how well they've done their operations and maintenance up to this point. So it'll be an interesting conversation as we go forward for local agencies to work with local stakeholders to make sure that those stormwater systems continue to function.
One thing I was going to mention, Jake, and you know this very well, that one trend that we've seen at DNR as far as development projects is a lot of redevelopment, which is great to see. So in other words, a lot of development we see is occurring in existing urban areas instead of the sprawl situation. We're repurposing lands that were previously developed, which is good for everyone. But it has been a trend in the last several years. There's a lot of redevelopment in existing urban, and that helps mitigate sprawl issues.
Yep, for sure. And if you ever read into the nitty gritty, kind of the nth detail of requirements of new development versus redevelopment, some of the redevelopment projects that you see, it's more challenging to try and take an existing ocean of impervious whatever and basically try and fit a newer, updated, modernized facility into that existing landscape. And so a lot of times you'll see a decreased requirement of performance metrics and decreased amount of stormwater management that's needed, just because you're taking a site that might not be that, might not be even all that possible to do some of those stormwater protocols. Plus, on top of that, a lot of times you spend a good portion of your money just removing some of the aged and some of the crippling facilities that are out there. So when you see someone taking an old parcel of property in an urban setting that's got who knows what, buried underneath that property, you could find yourself having to spend quite a bit just to kind of bring you back to a baseline compared to starting with an open field full of nothing. It's much more, it's better for everyone that we take some of those old eyesores and some of those very unhealthy properties and try and bring them up to speed.
Micki, did you want to add something?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, I was. Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what Pete and Jake said for MMSD. It gives us an opportunity to right the wrongs of the past. I mean, we didn't know any better. We put in concrete channels because we wanted to get the water away from the urban area. But it gives us an opportunity when I agree with Pete, we're seeing a lot of redevelopment that we can add some stormwater management into that system. And we're actually finding a lot of developers want to include green infrastructure and want to include some of those features because it adds to the quality of life of the people, especially in like a shopping area or where people are living. People want to see those kind of features, and sustainability is important. And so they're asking us for help to add those features into their developments or redevelopments. Thanks.
Yeah, I was to say, thank you, Micki. You're spot on with that. As consumers, anyone sitting in on this meeting, I would encourage you to look where you shop, who you buy your local groceries from, where you are going to the grocery store, and look around. Get your eyes up and follow to the low spot of the corner of the property and see where that water is going to go. And if you can't quite tell if there's a rain garden, a bioretention facility, ask them what happens to their storm. And I ask them because as consumers, we can speak with our dollars on those who are doing the right thing from a stormwater management perspective. I can tell you that there's a couple of breweries in Milwaukee that are using rainwater as part of their whole wort chiller program. Oh my goodness, Mobcraft I think is using a rainwater harvesting system instead of using potable water from the city. They're using that rainwater as a cooling element versus putting energy on the grid for cooling. They're using their rain off and runoff more sustainably. So I'm more inclined to go purchase from them just because I know they're doing the right thing that's above and beyond requirements. And I would encourage us all to do that.
But you brew your own beer, so we don't go there.
That doesn't mean Mobcraft doesn't make a pretty monster brew. It's a nice beer.
Laura.
Yes, thank you so much. Recently, we've seen news articles condemning beavers in terms of road maintenance. How can we bridge this issue and come to terms with the fact that beavers are the way forward for infrastructure maintenance in the future? Asked Susan Johnson.
Oh, I guess I'm the only guy talking about beavers, so I guess that question is for me first, at least. So obviously, beavers, just like any nature, stuff, which always interfere with people's life. I mean, nature sometimes can be inconvenience, just like storms. Beavers, yeah, I mean, for those of you who really had interaction with beavers, many of them feel they are more like a nuisance rather than something benefits the environment. Beavers, when they create a pond, unfortunately, sometimes they do, create flood conditions for like farms or roads, or bridges. I would say these issues are manageable and controllable. So instead of trap the beavers, kill them, or remove the dam they build, there are other means, such as I know that there are devices such as floatable water levelers that can control the size of the pond before we consider those extreme, measures. So I guess that's just the one aspect of that. More important, I think, for beaver itself and how we can be a friend of the beaver, having them help us to manage our environment is we need to more public education to know the issue and to know their benefits and some potential side effects that beavers, if we store them in large quantities, could bring to our environment and society. So that's just my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The next question comes from Carol Terrell. SEWRPC is a pioneer on identifying environmental corridors and green infrastructure. Congratulations. But land use, especially low density housing and shopping malls on productive agricultural land. How is SEWRPC encouraging more compact urban and suburban housing and development?
I think that's actually for me. So being a sewer pack person. And yes, this is kind of a tension, I'll admit, within our organization. We have primary environmental corridors, and there we'd like to keep it as intact as possible. A lot of these are along our stream corridors, and that is where we do tend to recommend low impact, low density development. So we are an advisory agency. I probably didn't define that well enough. So what we encourage our communities in their zoning to try and we'd like to see that compact where it works. So the houses closer together, and then they protect the environmental corridor in one big piece, which is more valuable to the critters that want to use it. But that's tough because we don't have that regulatory authority to tell them what to do. They need to follow through on their end with how they they allow development. So we have our role, and we definitely try to protect the corridors and help the communities protect those corridors for flooding and for natural resources as well. But ultimately, it comes down to the community managing their development.
All right, thank you, Laura. The next question is for Peter Wood. Is green infrastructure regulated by the DNR, or is this left to local government? And this question comes from Carol Terrell.
It's a mixed bag. Okay, so we require developers to put together stormwater management plans that may include something you would call green infrastructure, various stormwater management practices. But the municipalities also do the same thing. So it's kind of a dual regulatory process. So we're coming at it from both angles. So both entities are requiring some form of green infrastructure, depending on how you define it. The role that DNR provides is support for the technical design of those practices. So we provide what we call technical standards for things like permeable pavement, biofilters. Those are commonly described as green infrastructure practices. So we provide the guidance to designers and installers about how to put these things in, how big to make them, what their features should be. And then folks like Jake and his company go out and make these things and put them in the ground. So, but the answer to the question, it's essentially a combined effort between the state and the local governments to get these practices in the ground.
All right, thank you so much for that informative answer. The next question comes from Carol Dickelman. MMSD has funded many local projects such as pervious pavement and rain gardens. Would Micki Klappa-Sullivan like to address the data that has been collected from these projects?
Yeah, thank you. We have installed a lot of green infrastructure, but our goal is 740 million gallons. So we're, closer to like the 30 to 40 million gallons right now. We do have several projects where we're working with Marquette University, School of Freshwater Sciences with UWM to do analysis on it. I think it also coincides with people doing studies on the the water quality side of it. So again, like I stated earlier, we are looking at the quantity side of it. And Pete pointed out that, you know, if you have a rain garden in your yard, it's not going to help against the, you know, 100-year storm event. But, you know, if you have, you know, maybe an inch or two of rain, it's going to divert some flow away from the stormwater system, or, you know, especially away from the sanitary system. So we're in the process of gathering data, but, you know, we're, you know, in the first 10 years of our green infrastructure program. So we're still in the development of gathering the data to do analysis.
Great, thank you very much, Micki. The next question comes from Michael Goodman. Shouldn't there be other less damaging materials besides salt which could be used to melt ice?
Who would like to take that question?
As far as I know, this is Chen. I've heard that there are some alternatives I mean, most common probably use sand. I'm not an expert in that field, but that's just what I learned. You know, there are other solutions such as, for example, beet juice that actually has been used somewhere to reduce the condition where the road can get icy. Or maybe cheese brine. That's a material used for producing cheese, which could be used in Wisconsin. I'm just not aware, you know, who actually, you know, using these alternative materials at a larger scale.
This is Pete again. I think Laura Herrick can maybe help out with this, but, you know, definitely it's something DNR is really interested in, but unfortunately all the alternatives have their own side effects. So really the approach, I think, and maybe Laura can talk about this more, is really salt minimization and being more efficient with how it's applied. So there's some techniques that we're encouraging municipalities to use for how they apply salt, when they apply salt, using brine instead of actually rock salt. So I don't know if Laura can add to that, but that's really where we're heading, is trying to be as efficient as possible with the use of salt. The alternatives just aren't, there's not like a magic silver bullet alternative for road salt.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Yeah, no, I agree. Definitely reducing the sources. Brining is wonderful. If you've ever seen the stripes on the pavement, that's pre-wetting. So it's a more efficient way to get salt down. It's not bouncing off into the ditches, et cetera. Professor Lau mentioned beet juice and the cheese, and that has issues because it's food for, it'll cause algal blooms. You know, it's sugars. That's the problem with that. Sand is wonderful. And I know some of our townships definitely just use sand at intersections, but then that's a sediment source. So yes, reducing sources. I know a lot of the communities are moving to brining. It requires some equipment, you know, modifications. They need liquid trucks, et cetera, but they're definitely showing a great reduction in use. I think it also requires a great reduction in expectations. Does our pavement, you know, really need to be dry the next day after a storm event, or should we stay home? I think that's a whole nother piece that I think the legal aspects of it for private salting too on parking lots. If you've ever seen how horrible some of our parking lots look, that's partially how the contractors are paid, by the amount they spread. And that's something we hope to tackle as well in our study. And there's other sources. I think water softening is a bigger source than we realize. You know, it's getting to our treatment plants and it's going right into our streams. Some of the more rural parts of our region, at least, feel water softening, and fertilizers on our ag fields could be another significant source beyond the road salting. There's more going on there than just road salting. Thank you.
As I say, I would like to think that some of the after effects of the pandemic actually might drive down some of our salt usage, just because of the amount of remote work that might occur. And so we'll call that a silver lining, that we are more equipped and more able to work remotely now. And so when a snowstorm does hit, there might be more opportunities for, say, a facility that would have to do a full blast on de-icing and plowing of their parking lots, that maybe they don't have to do that right away. that maybe there's a chance that some of that might decrease in salt usage just because we can all work remotely instead. Maybe I'm an over optimist on that, but we can always hope.
All right, thank you all so much for that valuable information. Our next question comes from Carol Diggleman. Will Professor Liao address issues that need more research support, please?
Well, support is badly needed, for all kinds of research. If you think about the fundamental research, typically those are funded by National Science Foundation or other federal agencies, NOAA, Department of Energy, and so on. And then I think they're important. You can see that the federal government, hasn't been really increased the funding support at these levels for fundamental research. I believe they're important because there might be future breakthrough technologies. We just don't know what the fundamental research can bring us to, that's why I think that's important. But more important, I think, in terms of improving our specifically infrastructure, there's kind of research which is critically needed are those we call translational research, which means research that can translate the fundamental science and technology into the applied level. And there's not many means that researchers can get funding for that type of research. So, for example, it could be, let's say, studies on, say, performance of green infrastructure, or maybe data science that can be applied to better manage these infrastructures, or maybe cost-effective, low-cost, sensors that can detect the, chemicals in stormwater as well as drinking water. What else I'm thinking about? But all of these, maybe a very novel material that can be directly applied to remove some of the bad stuff like PFAS in our stormwater. And speaking of that, I think somebody asked about whether PFAS being regulated in the stormwater. As far as I know, that I've heard that EPA is considering having the PFAS being monitored in effluent. I don't know where that goes. But anyway, talking about research in this aspect, I think those translational research, my personal opinion, they need more support. Thank you.
All right, the next question will be our last question today. It comes from Susan Johnson. Are there any Wisconsin laws that need to be changed to encourage more redevelopment with sustainable stormwater infrastructure rather than new development?
Any takers?
Sounds like a land use regulation, I think, Laura, right? I mean, is there any political, movement in that area?
Well, and I know, and Micki could maybe speak to it, MMSD has looked at local ordinances. I really feel like development is predominantly at the local level. And I think there's good push for redevelopment on vacant parcels or unused parcels, but I will admit I'm not really sure of any Wisconsin laws specifically that, sorry, I didn't go to my camera on, that need to change. I think it's first at the local level, although building codes are at the state level, so that could be potentially part of it as well, but I don't know.
It would probably take some sort of statewide land use effort to do that. I don't even know, are there other states that even have attempted something like that, or do you know? Or
not that I know of, but then again, land use isn't I'm
yeah. I think it tends to be a local thing, right? And I don't know if states get involved. That's what it would take. It would take a state level effort to somehow control land use at the local level, right? And that seems like it would be a hard road to go down.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have heard anecdotal evidence from contractors in the Milwaukee area that it's easier to do new development than redevelopment, but I think that's somewhat due to the local hoops you have to jump through within like the city of Milwaukee, for example, that it's just a bigger challenge to redevelop. Sometimes it's a contaminated site too. That adds a whole nother level of issue if you're in a more very urban setting, which is where some of our vacant sites are that we really see in our major cities in our part of the state. So that's something to consider with redevelopment, as often there's also a cleanup component to them, not just a demo, but could be contaminated soils. And that raises the bar for the level of effort. I don't have any other thoughts, so pass it on.
Laura, there is some, I'm not gonna let you off the hook, but there is some control, and this involves both you guys and us with the sewer service area approvals, right? Where we do have some oversight with how municipal sewer service areas are expanded, and that does tend to limit development. And I know you guys are somewhat involved in that, right?
Right.
I know we are too, but that's one angle the state has. I just don't know all the process involved, but there is some oversight with how municipal sewers are extended out into undeveloped areas.
Correct. Yes, and it's always that tension. The communities plan to grow significantly, but then when they get down to their sewer service area, that's what they have to plan for their treatment plant. So they plan it smaller because you're trying to do that 20-year look for planning for your wastewater treatment plant. At least for the outer communities, City of Milwaukee, is kind of contained, and so we don't have much control over. They're all within MMSD and City of Milwaukee. Water and MMSD for sewer. So that's where I was thinking of the redevelopment was within the current service areas. You're right, though, growth, we do have some, but it's often driven by what the community wants to do with their neighbors too, how they're going to grow.
Thank you, Laura. Micki, did you want to add something briefly?
Yeah, just really quickly, we did work with our 28 municipalities to try and adjust some of their rules to add green infrastructure into each one of their projects as part of like the zoning code. So that was what Laura was referring to. And, we had varied success with that, so.
Thank you. Well, this concludes our question and answer portion. And thank you all for a very lively discussion and for great questions and answers. Our summer series continues with 2 programs. The next one will be on drinking water and wastewater on August 5th, and hazardous waste and solid waste on August 19th. Again, we will feature ASCE Wisconsin infrastructure author presentations and invited Wisconsin professional panelists. Please register and join us, and you can do so at the calendar events on the League of Women Voters website. And I know Laura put the link in the chat where you can see previous programs. It has been my pleasure to work with all of you on this program. I thank the League of Women Voters Wisconsin staff and members for everything you do to facilitate these meetings. Thank you to the audience for your questions, and thank you all for attending. I will now turn it over to Louise to close us out. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Ann. The League thanks Carl Sutter, from whom you heard earlier today with his remarks about the ASCE. We also want to hold up Kenneth Micah and Jennifer Schopp, who served as the volunteer co-chairs of the ASCE Wisconsin 2020 report card. In addition, Jake Brunoehler and Martin Hansen participated in our steering committee meetings. Many, many thanks to Carol Diggleman. All of you panelists and authors are quite aware that she has done a yeoman's job in organizing these category meetings. Finally, I'd like to hold up the ASCE Wisconsin section for being the recipient of the National ASCE Advocate of the Year Award this 2021. The League of Women Voters values this partnership in the public interest. Next slide. Thank you to these women and Daniel, who are listed here. We are part of the planning team Also the staff, league members around Wisconsin. We're all from Wisconsin. Thank you for your contributions to this educational program about stormwater and dams infrastructure in Wisconsin. You have all contributed to the behind the scenes work in planning these invaluable meetings. Next slide. The League now urges a call to action, a call made more compelling by recent proposals for significant spending on infrastructure, one of which the US Senate moved forward last evening. Let's see what's in the workings of the bill as it is written. The details can often be very challenging. Very, very important now to share your view with your representative in the House of Representatives and our state senators. Urge them to be aware of your concerns for infrastructure. Urge them to read the ASCE's failure to act document. In this compelling report, ASCE forecasts that our current pattern of underfunding infrastructure will cost every US household $3,300 on average every year for the next 20 years. What we have spent and are spending now is not enough. Decision makers who hold the purse strings need to hear from us. So please heed the bullet points here, identify your local infrastructure priorities, and begin conversations, whether in person, by tweet, Zoom, whatever, with your friends, neighbors, and local officials. Jot down your concerns and priorities. Tell your concerns more than once to your local, county, state, and federal elected officials. And do sign up for the future category Zoom meetings that Ann has mentioned earlier. We encourage you to stay in touch with the League of Women Voters and to look at past programs on our website, very bottom left on our homepage. Our infrastructure must serve us all. Support infrastructure investment. Many thanks for joining the program this afternoon, and do enjoy your evening. Next slide.